Welcome, and thank you for coming out on this morning. It was a tough night last night, but we are moving on. We're thrilled to have you all here this morning at the Gloucester House. Thank you so much, Lenny and your team, for hosting us again. You're so great in everything that you do for the Gloucester and Cape Ann community. I've got a couple of sponsors to thank this morning, Johnson & O'Connor CPA and RE/MAX Advantage. Thank you very much for supporting this event. We've got fantastic board and past president turnout. I'm going to read quickly through our attendees. Please hold your applause until the end. Christine Armstrong, Armstrong Brand Consulting. Lisa Bonneville, Bonneville Design. Tony Correo, Precision Roofing. Meredith Fine, Cape Ann Business Law. Susan Gould Coviello, North Shore Health Project. Katie Call, UMass Amherst Marine Station. Mike Luster, Cape Ann Savings Bank. Caitlin Pizzeni, Cape Ann Lanes. Richard Ross, Project Adventure. Tony Sapienza, Blue Shutters Beachside Inn. Bonnie Scatterday, Woodmans of Essex. Catherine Wall, Bank Gloucester. Pat Slade, Manchester Cricket. And myself, Ken Reel, CEO, Cape Ann Chamber of Commerce. And quickly, our past presidents. We have 2018, Pat Slade, Manchester Cricket. 2014, Mike Luster, Cape Ann Savings Bank. 2012, Mark Grenier, Bank Gloucester. 2006, Bob Gillis, Cape Ann Savings Bank. 2003, Scott Memhard, Cape Pond Ice. Thank you all for supporting us and everything that we do here. We have a number of elected officials in the room. I'll start with Rockport Town Moderator, Bob Visnick. Thank you, Bob, for coming this morning. Of course, we have our mayor, the Honorable Safathia Romeo Taken. Thank you, Mayor. Councilors, Melissa Cox, President, Paul Lundberg, Scott Memhard, and Steve LeBlanc. Thank you very much, City Councilors. We have Jim Destino with us, Chief Administrative Officer from the city. Thank you, Jim, for joining us. And we have State Representative Ann-Margaret Ferrante. Thank you, Ann-Margaret, for coming this morning. And Bruce Tarr has entered the room. Welcome, Bruce. Just in time. What I'd like to do is bring up Ann-Margaret here. I think she wanted to say a few words, and then I'll introduce the mayor, and we'll hear from the governor. Come on up, Ann-Margaret, please.
Good morning, everyone. Governor Baker, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you in particular and let this crowd know that you were very helpful in making sure that we got the 3-month delay in implementing the financial side of the paid family leave. So thank you for your work on that. I know that that issue is very important to a lot of people that are here.
I think it's in the House today, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The fun we shall have today. But that being said, Governor, you know that I chair the Economic Development Committee, and on behalf of the mayor, on the behalf of Senator Tarr, on behalf of everybody here, I just want to encourage you to continue to work with us to solve the problems of the harbor. You know, it's not too hard or difficult to just look behind you and you see properties that are depressed there. We need your help. We can revitalize this harbor. We can bring great things to Gloucester. So let's work together. Let's get it done and do great things. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy your breakfast, and I look forward to seeing you after the governor speaks.
Senator Tarr, would you like to say a couple words as you have joined us? Never short for words.
Would you like to repeat that? No.
Well chosen. I won't tell you what the governor just said. There's too much hanging in the balance for all of us for me to repeat that. I also want to say good morning and thanks to the Chamber for always getting us together around important topics. It was great last week to be with you all for Small Business Week and to celebrate all of the people in this community that make for such a high quality of life and a good spirit, not only of interdependence, but also a good spirit of how we can support each other in so many endeavors. And that's why it's great to welcome the governor here today, this morning, with all of you, because we all know what a good friend to Cape Ann Governor Charlie Baker has been. We've been friends for a very long time, and there's one thing that speaks volumes above everything else. People will tell you that he's great with numbers, and he really is. and he really understands and gets deep into policy, and he really does. But most of all, what he does is try to understand all of the issues that we face as people, and to understand how we can make a connection and work together and find solutions that make sense for all of us. And he's demonstrated that on so many different occasions, whether it be the urgency of climate change, which we all face directly here, and as we sit on this property, we understand very closely the nature of, or the development of alternative energy, where Massachusetts continues to lead the country, or whether it's trying to understand how we can work together to address the scourge of opiates, which has hit us in the same way that it's hit communities all across the country. This governor didn't walk away from that challenge, didn't ignore that challenge. He stepped up to the plate. Number one, he talked about it in terms that we could all understand and helped us all to confront it. And number two, he's been working for very practical solutions to try to help us address that deadly situation. And so it's wonderful that he could be here with us. And Governor, I know that as you walk into this room, you find a collection of similarly minded people who want to work together, who want to advance a common goal, and who want to make sure that whatever we do, it makes life better for those not only that are here now, but those who will come in the future. So it's a great opportunity to hear from the governor this morning. There's a lot going on, as Ann-Margaret mentioned. We've got so many things that are moving on a fast track in the legislative process. It'll be great to hear his perspective, but most of all, great to give our governor a great big Cape Ann welcome and extend our hands to continue to work with him as we have in the past. So that being said, good morning, everyone. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Bruce. I ditto those remarks, and also would like to welcome the governor. We're so pleased that you're here this morning, and I know that you're a regular and a local to Cape Ann and a friend to Cape Ann, and we really do welcome you here to the Gloucester House to talk about what's going on in the state and around Cape Ann. With that, I'd like to introduce the mayor and come up and introduce our governor. Thank you.
I don't know why he did everything. It's like, 5 more minutes, you couldn't wait 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes, you kill it every time. It's like, who's going to go after Bruce? Me and Ann-Margaret or whoever's going, who's going after Bruce? So it's like, it's impossible, but rightfully so. Right, everything he said, rightfully so. We're very fortunate. There is so many things and so many issues that are happening around the whole United States. And so when everyone else is worried about impeachment and everything else, we have to worry about struggling what's going to come into the state of Massachusetts and how we're going to do that and how we're going to continue the economic. So let me tell you something. My friend, and I call him my friend is because he's been to Gloucester, I think, more than he's been anywhere else. And I won't say...
Just go right on, keep continuing to think that, Mayor.
Yeah. Well, don't forget, I know what side of the private beach you are at Wingy. I know which house, even though I pretend I don't. So, saying that, you have to look at the economy. It's been booming. The state of Massachusetts has excelled. And I'm telling you that because I work with a lot of different other states still in healthcare. As you know, I volunteer on Friday, so it's everywhere. And we're excelling. We're excelling in so many different issues. We're ahead of the game. Some people don't even have Narcans in their city. And, we're excelling that. Some people are not addressing the mental health issue. And that's what we're doing. And so what's happening is, we're dealing with the opioid issue, and in order to deal with the opioid crisis, you have to deal with the mental health crisis. If we don't help our children now, what's happening, I talked to Secretary Studders. We had everyone from behavioral health in my office, and with Ann-Margaret and Bruce, we had a conference call. We're going back and forth. It's not the lack of therapists. It's the therapists who don't take insurance. So we have 1,200 juvenile therapists, and 900 don't take insurance. So what's happening? And we're dealing with that. And not only that, when the governor had his council here, they stayed an extra 2 hours, along with the commissioner of mental health. And we decided what we're going to do. We're having a listening session. The first Essex County listening session is going to be on my birthday. Happy birthday to me, August 14th, 4 to 6. You're all welcome. We need input. And we're going to have a massive behavioral health people there. We're going to figure out what we can do. And that's what I'm talking about this governor. The economy's great, so I don't have to keep talking because you guys have your businesses. As the Cape Ann Chamber, you know how you're doing. Actually, it's difficult to find employees. And that's what's happened. Like Secretary Keneally, he says, I don't want to increase employment. I want to keep the employment we have. I want to keep these people continued to work. I want to keep these people who've been struggling for the past 20 years, who are now excelling, to find employees. We're working on the blue economy. We need to find blue collar. What can we do? And so how do we do that? Minimum wage is going up, and it's a struggle with certain businesses. Same thing with Head Start, because if a person's making that little extra, they don't get all these other programs. We're working on that. And what's even better, we're working on affordable housing. So in order to get these blue collars to come to Gloucester, because why are we going to keep them here? Who's going to be your dishwasher? Who's going to be your prep cook? Who's going to be your cook, your masonry, if we can't keep them here? So we're learning to house them also. We're working on that. And with MassWorks and everything what the governor's done for Gloucester, we've excelled. We really have excelled. We started off in 2015 in the hole, about $1 million. We're up to $12 million in the free cash, and we're doing all these wonderful things in Gloucester. We excelled because the programs that the governor, so he shines, he makes me shine, Jim shine. No, Jim don't let me spend a penny anyway, so it doesn't make a difference. But the fact is, we excel, a tag team. And I want to say that with the team because, can I tell you, Governor, you have the best lieutenant governor that I've ever worked with, ever. She is amazing.
That's not just because she's Italian.
That's right. Yes. Sicilian, get it right. And so the fact, and she's female Sicilian, so the fact is that we work together so closely, and it's a tag team. And that's what it is. If you don't have a good team, then you're not going to excel in anything you do. And that's what we're lucky in Cape Ann. Because Cape Ann, we acknowledge that we are Cape Ann. Rockport, Gloucester, Manchester, Essex, we're all working together. Why? Is because we want our destination. We know we have Discover Gloucester. We know it's Destination Gloucester. We know we brought that tourism up. And now we need to get the employment. We need to work on the housing so we can do that. We need to work in the fishing industry. He's working very closely with Angela. Thank you for coming. Angela Sanfilippo's here with the partnership. He's keeping that program alive. That support services does so much. And it's helping fishermen actually when they can't work to work. We have Al Catone, my fisheries director, like the haircut, Al. And make that excel. We work together. And that's what it's about. We are going to help the fishing industry. We're working on a solution is how do we get these? Because it's difficult in Gloucester. See, 90% of these wharfs are privately owned. New Bedford, they own 90%. So how do we do that? How do we help private industry actually excel and be able to get help from the state? We're working on that, like a revolving fund we did with the fishermen. Show me economics, show me the works, how we training the fishermen to actually learn things, and the Massachusetts Fishermen's Partnership is working on that. So we're working on training and keeping these jobs. So we don't need to create new jobs. We need to sustain the jobs we have. We need to put our veterans when they come home to work, and they want to. So the Veteran Services is working with all of you, and that's great, and thank you, because guess what? I love the program we have here in Gloucester. We do ribbon cutting for everything you can think of. I love those ribbons and those big scissors. But now we're endorsing and we're supporting our veterans own. So when you see a little seal like the Gloucester Fresh, you'll see veterans owned businesses. Thank you, Cape Ann Chamber, for acknowledging that and going out to the veterans who are now opening their own business. A hand of applause for the Cape Ann Chamber. Thank you very much on that one. So we're helping. We're not saying, okay, veterans, well, we'll find you housing, we'll find you this. No, we'll help you create and sustain yourselves and family. And thank you for serving the country. And now you're opening your own businesses. And thank you for choosing Gloucester. So that's great. So we're doing all these programs, and we couldn't do it. Stop talking. I'm talking, Governor. Really. Bruce?
We were talking
About the fish? You want me to go get a fish? Yes. I knew you were doing it. I knew it. I knew it. And there's no fish early in the morning like this. Don't worry about it. You're cool. I got it. No fresh fish. So he'll tell you, I'm sure. But the fact is, Governor, really, I just want to applaud you, because the fact is, it's not just, okay, here, Gloucester, here, I like you, here's money, or whatever. What can we do to make Gloucester exceed? Well, you know what? You have Bruce, who's always poking you. You have ann-margaret, which is a tag team. Talk about a team. Gloucester couldn't be more vibrant without Senator Tarr and ann-margaret. They work so closely with my office. Who does this on a Friday? Can I see you at 4 o'clock? Are you crazy? But I will. We'll open City Hall. We're gonna try, and they're coming again at 2 to see if we can restore part of City Hall. Sprinkler systems, fire protection. We have to protect ourselves in our old buildings, and we do that. So it's not just one thing; it's everything that we work together. And I can go on, but I won't. And so I just want to say, everyone, I'm honored actually because I really never actually endorsed any governor, and I endorsed you because I believe it. And I am honored here today to actually say welcome to Gloucester again. Thank you so much for everything you've done. And my good friend, Governor Charlie Baker.
Morning. So first of all, let me just start by thanking all of you for being here the morning after, because I know a lot of people were probably up late last night, first watching and then crying when the whole thing was over. Let me start with this. One of the most important sort of missions that the Lieutenant Governor I pursued over the course of the past 4.5 years was to create really positive relationships with communities. And our view on this one's really simple, which is that our goal ultimately is to be an enabler. And when I say that, I mean, I think state government's greatest opportunity to build a great commonwealth is to enable communities to be successful. And nobody gets up in the morning and thinks about how their day is going or how their life is going based on what's going on specifically on Beacon Hill, right? They think about that through the neighborhoods they live in, the schools their kids go to, the parks they play in, the quality of their town center, and the nature of the economy. And that is really the way people, generally speaking, think about whether there's positivity, optimism, and possibility for them going forward. And so from the very beginning, our whole view on this has been, how can we help communities be strong? And Lieutenant Governor's been to all 351 cities and towns. I've probably been to over 200. But the message that also sent to everybody in our cabinet is get out of your office, get out into the communities of the Commonwealth, talk to people about what's going on, and figure out how you can be helpful in helping them build on their strengths and mitigate their concerns. And that's really been the way we've approached a lot of what we've done. And I think that's translated in many parts of Massachusetts into strategies that were built off that. And I'll give you some examples. We used to have a Seaport Council in the Commonwealth way back in the day when I worked for Governors Bill Weld and Paul Cellucci. Just sort of disappeared in between. And then after we took office, based on conversations that Karen and I were having with our colleagues in local government, especially those that were located in coastal communities around the Commonwealth, there was this, well, you know, there used to be this Seaport Council, and that Seaport Council was really helpful in creating strategies and dialogue and investments around things we could do to help coastal communities. And so we recreated it. And the recreation of that council literally happened because of the conversations that we were having with our colleagues in local government in places like this. I also happen to live in a coastal community, so that certainly didn't hurt. But the point here was the decision to reinvigorate that council came from conversations with local communities about why it was important for the Commonwealth to have a place and a space where local coastal communities could come engage the Commonwealth. And some of the investments that we've made in those 78 coastal communities over the course of the past 5 years have come from those conversations and those dialogues, and several of them have been up here. The work,
$1 million for a new harbor master's office.
yeah, right. And one of the things that is currently before the legislature, I'm testifying next week, and based on the senator and the representative's comments, I'm looking forward to them to supporting it, is a piece of legislation that we filed to create a sort of expendable trust to invest in communities around resiliency. And the reason we did this as an expendable trust is if you create an expendable trust, you have the ability to support both private and public entities along the coast. The Commonwealth, if you do it through bond funds, the Commonwealth cannot invest in private entities at all. I mean, that's just the way it works. We can only do this through expendable trusts. And one of the reasons we did it that way is because a lot of the infrastructure that exists around bodies of water, not just ocean bodies of water, but inland bodies of water as well, are private. And we want to be able to support them as well. And that particular initiative would create a fund that would generate about $130 million a year, which over 10 years obviously is more than $1 billion, which could be spent on infrastructure improvements to protect and preserve commercial property, private property, public property, and other community assets. And I'll tell you why this one's so important. The governors all go to Washington every February to meet with state agents or federal agencies and with members of Congress. And when we were down there this past February, a number of us went and met with FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, to talk about resiliency, adaptation, and climate change. And FEMA pointed out to us that they spent $80 billion in the past 2 years on disaster recovery initiatives. And that was more than they had spent in the previous 35 years put together, which was a big signal to them about the fact that there's a greater severity and frequency of storms out there, and it's translating into more significant damage, which led to two very important changes in philosophy at FEMA. One of them was they started to put out grants to states and to local communities to do some of this work around vulnerability planning and resiliency, because they're the ones who end up writing the checks when something awful happens. And if they're not in the business of helping states and localities figure out how to create resilient communities, especially in areas that are hit hard when there are storms, they're going to have to keep writing bigger checks after the fact. And so this whole notion of getting into the preventive business on the front end associated with storms is a big deal for them to start thinking that way. The second thing is, forever and ever, FEMA basically provides financial support to get something back to the way it was. And they are very particular about that. Anybody who's ever dealt with them knows that they are not going to spend one dime of federal money to do anything other than support getting you back to the way you were, whatever it was. And they are now starting to think that getting you back to the way you were just means that if the next storm comes rolling through, you're going to end up with exactly the same problem, and they're going to be writing the same check that they were writing the last time to solve it the next time. And so they started talking about maybe we need to be in the business of supporting communities, not just get back to the way they were, but actually take a forward-looking approach so that we create capacity to actually live through, manage through the next natural disaster. And this is a really big deal for the feds to start thinking about this way, about these issues. But for us, as the first state to create a vulnerability planning exercise where cities and towns with our money and a lot of guidance and advice are doing the planning around vulnerabilities and figuring out what their biggest concerns are, and then working with us to put together a plan to mitigate against those hazards so that they're in a position to deal with them. If the feds decide to get involved in this, it'll make a really big difference, because as it is right now, it's basically us and locals, and that's why this expendable trust program that we've got before the legislature, which I'm hoping Representative Ferrante and Senator Tarr will find a way to support. Did I say that? I've said it twice. How many times do you think I need to say it? That's enough? Okay. That's a big part of how we think we're going to help communities like this and other, frankly, all communities across the Commonwealth deal with the pretty significant investments that we're all going to need to make to deal with storm severity and frequency on a go-forward basis. And there are thousands of culverts in Massachusetts, and most of those culverts were built for a very different time. And when those culverts fail, they create real issues for communities across Massachusetts. And when I just think about how much work we need to do on culverts before you even get to issues like the one you were talking about, this is a big deal, and we're going to need to come up with a way on a sustained basis to fund a program that can make that stuff happen. With respect to economic development generally, I would just say this. The most important thing we've tried to do, again, is to hear from our colleagues on the ground about what's going on and what's working and what's happening and where they need help. And so we've had 3 separate rounds of literally tours around the Commonwealth where senior leaders in our administration have had scheduled meetings with folks across the Commonwealth, and that has led to reports that then led to legislation that we signed in the summer of 2016 and then again in the summer of 2018 that was passed by the legislature, economic development bills. And they contain a lot of different elements, but they've mostly been about the things that we can do to help communities invest in their downtowns, invest in their transportation infrastructure, invest in their people. And overall, those programs have been very effective at helping communities make really smart strategic investments in their workforce, in their infrastructure, and in their downtowns, and in the things they believe are going to be most important to their success going forward, like the Genomics Institute, which is one of the ones we did here. But I think one of the things I would want you to all take away from this morning is that we think this particular approach, and we're currently going through the same exercise, the Lieutenant Governor has been chairing meetings around the Commonwealth to collect, again, input and guidance from folks on the local level about where it is we should be putting our money and making our investments. We'll be filing a bill probably, I would guess, sometime either later this fall. I'm looking at Bruce because he'll be one of the first ones to get a copy of it. We'll be filing a bill sometime later this fall, the beginning of next year, with the hope that we can get that legislation passed by the end of the session. And it will be based on the guidance and advice that we get from people in local communities about where the Commonwealth's resources ought to be going and where we ought to be making investments. Now, with respect to that, one of the things that's come up over and over again in these conversations is we need to build more housing. And you just need to look at the math on this one. We've added 500,000 people to the state's population in the past 15 years or so. We have built a fraction of that number of new places to live. And in a state where we used to build 30,000 new units of housing every year like clockwork, for the past 30 years we've been building about less than half that number of new housing units. And there's a bunch of reasons for it, but one of them is, you know, from the 30s through the 90s, or to the 90s, the Commonwealth was just sort of building out, I guess is the way I would describe it, building itself out. But at some point, you get there on that one, and then you have to start thinking differently about how you're going to think about zoning, planning, permitting, and building from that point forward. The second thing that's happened is our demography has changed. We now have far more people than we've ever had as a percent of our total population that are empty nesters. They'd love to stay in the community that they raise their family in, but there's no place for them to live. And then the other element that's going on here is the change in the way retail works. Every town center, for the most part, across the Commonwealth, every city center has always been dominated by retail. Well, the problem with thinking about retail is the way you drive your downtowns at this point is so many people are buying so much stuff online that there are limits to with respect to how much you can lean on retail to be the solution to your city square or your town square. And so what people really have started to think about here is, how do I make my town square, my downtown, my city square, my city center, my town center, how do I make that about live, work, and play? And that translates into housing, office space, hospitality, and entertainment. And that's really the way most communities are starting to think about how to do this. Retail piece, sure, but you can't make retail kind of the big stake in the ground that drives all of that stuff. You need other elements to pull this off. And that requires thinking differently and sort of reimagining how you think about your town squares, your city squares, your downtowns. And to do that with the rules and the standards that we've had in place in the Commonwealth, literally for almost 100 years, which were based on a very different time, doesn't make a lot of sense. So the legislation that we have pending to get us back into the business of producing the kinds of housing and the amount of housing that we need to produce just to serve our young people and our seniors and our families and all the rest, It's currently pending before the legislature. We had our hearing before the Housing Committee on this, and it's our hope and our expectation that at some point during this legislation, we will update all the rules associated with how we handle housing, so that locals can make the best decisions they need to make on behalf of the people of their communities. This isn't a bunch of new state mandates, but it does, again, enable cities and towns. It's basically about giving them more flexibility to actually get where they need to go as they rethink how they're going to deal with the housing issues we all face. And I get into a big debate with people about, well, what about this kind of housing and that kind of housing and this kind of housing and that kind of housing? If you don't deal with the arcane way, 50 years old or more, that we have set up the process for housing production in Massachusetts first, you're just not going to build anything. You're not going to build senior housing, you're not going to build affordable housing, you're not going to build young family housing, you're not going to build downtown, you're just going to build nothing, which is kind of where we've sat now for almost 30 years. Now, when you don't build anything, what happens? Scarcity. And what happens when you have scarcity? There's no inventory, so anything that goes on the market gets bid out of sight, and that just pushes people farther and farther away from where they grew up, where they raised their family, where they want to live, to find a place they can afford. And it's an existential threat to our economy, to our young people, to everybody. And that's another one where we're really hoping we get some help from our colleagues in the legislature and some help from you to make this happen. I talk to businesses all the time, and they say the cost of housing and the availability of housing is a significant impediment to their ability to continue to grow. Now, the two other things I just want to mention quickly, and then we could do some questions and answers. You can ask the question, and the mayor will give the answers. On this opioid and addiction and mental health issue, we're doing a series of listening sessions on this too, okay? To get out there and hear from people about, we made some pretty significant progress here in Massachusetts around addiction and opioids, and a lot of states have adopted many of the things that we've done in their own efforts to battle this terrible epidemic. And we've seen some modest progress, but we have miles to go, and we're not kidding anybody on that one. Took us a very long time to get into this terrible, terrible place that we're in, and it's going to take a long time to get out. And I say to people all the time, the opioid epidemic didn't happen overnight. It happened over the course of about 15 or 20 years. And you can't just pass a couple of bills and snap your fingers and expect it all to be better. This is going to be one of those ones that we're going to have to stay disciplined, stay engaged, and stay diligent, and continue to adapt as we go forward. And the epidemic itself is adapting as well. When we first got into this in 2013 and 14, fentanyl no one was talking about fentanyl. And now fentanyl is present in about 80 or 90% of all the overdose deaths, not just here in Massachusetts, but around the country. And as this epidemic changes, we're going to have to change and adjust along with it and stay on it and stay with it. But this whole issue of behavioral health generally, mental health, addiction, it's all part of a big, larger issue. And rather than just sort of popping something out there, when we went after the opioid piece, when we've gone after economic development, when we thought about this climate resiliency stuff, when we thought about what to do about housing production, we listened. We spent a lot of time talking to people around the Commonwealth and gathering thoughts and ideas and advice from them about what to do. And so we're currently doing listening sessions on this, and those listening sessions will probably wrap up toward the end of the summer, the beginning of the fall, and then at that point we'll file legislation, which hopefully the gang in the legislature will be able to take a look at toward the end of this year, the beginning of next year, and maybe get something done on that as well by the end of the session. And the other thing I just want to mention is there's a big and really important conversation going on education reform. I was in state government in the 90s, so was Bruce when we passed the original education reform bill in Massachusetts. It was a combination of accountability standards, and what I would call sort of professional development opportunities on the process side, and it was a rejiggering of the way the state and local communities funded education on the financial side. And it was a risk. Nobody knew if it was going to work. It turned out to work pretty well. Massachusetts went from being a middle-of-the-pack player on most of the national education assessment exams to being the #1 player. We've been the #1 player now for the past 7 or 8 years in a row. But we still have big issues we need to deal with in terms of differences within districts and differences between districts in terms of student performance, graduation rates, attendance, and all the rest. Legislature did some really good work on how to think about updating that foundation budget. And I think currently all eyes are on the Education Committee, which is currently wrestling its way through a variety of proposals that have been made. We made one, Senate made one, House made one. There's a bunch of different options on the table here, but it's my hope that sometime during this session we will get an update on education reform, sort of Education Reform 2.0, which will both update the financial modeling associated with this, but also continue to build on the very successful assessment and accountability standards that have always been a big part of the way we've done education here in the Commonwealth, so that we can close that opportunity gap that exists between some schools in some school districts and other schools in other school districts. I mean, one of the really hard parts about this is almost every school district that has significant issues with respect to student performance has schools in their school district that perform at or above the statewide averages, like way above in some cases. And at the same time, you also have some really terrific school districts where there are schools that perform way below the statewide averages. And so there's definitely some elements there that are both school-specific and district-specific that we need to work on and to try to find a way to really take some of those best practices that are clearly making a difference, even in districts that are struggling, and find a way to make them part of the larger way those districts operate overall, and then at the same time deal with the very real and significant issues associated with financing. And I'm actually pretty confident and optimistic that that'll get done sometime during the session. And with that, I'm going to stop and open up the floor and just tell you all that if you want to know why the Bruins lost last night, I can't help you.
One more thing, so they don't know something about what happened. You read in the newspaper that all of a sudden National Seafood closed its doors without warning. And usually by law, you're supposed to get 60 days. In 60 days, supposed to come in with the team and do the health insurance, unemployment, the whole thing. So we find out Friday at 3 o'clock that they shut the doors. Friday at 4 o'clock, I'm texting all the team from the governments, Tar, Ferrante, the governor. What are we going to do? By Monday morning at 10 a.m., my office will full of all state people to help. Write in what's law, what's not law, what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to get the 60 days, how they're supposed to get this, how we're not going to do it. We talked to the city council. Then half of you that were here, social services, all came in. We set up less than a week, Monday at City Hall, all things that we can do like a job fair. And you all participated. It was great. We had 30 of you coming in and doing things. And the best thing about it, even our Gloucester school system said, you know, if they don't have any jobs and by the time they get unemployment, have them apply for free lunch if they have children. No one even thinks of those things. And that's what I'm saying. State comes in, mass development, everything you can think of under the sun. Less than 3 weeks, new owner, they opened the doors and 80% of those employees were hired back. Same pay, same position, same everything, insurance, everything else. The rest was hired by you. No one lost a job. Now, that's right, in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, the state came in, pulled together a team that I've never seen, and it was amazing, absolutely amazing. Within 3 weeks, we had that company up and running again, and everyone has a job. We have a person, we're trying to encourage females. We have a female person, last year, she opened up a business and did 1.6 million pounds of lobster. She has 40 lobster boats. We're now encouraging her. She outgrew her space. We're going to find more work in waterfront. We're working that. The Seaport Economic Council, we're on that. We want to thank you for the money. Look at, take a walk down the boulevard, $7 million. Take a walk around the city. Take a walk now with his new, very soon, Harbor Master's office. And so the bond that he was talking about, I feel really good about that, and I feel some of my wharf owners are going to be fixing up their wharfs, worried about the future because of coastal resilience, because, like he said, you can't just build a wall. You got to make sure that that wall is going to be there forever. So you have to have also a plan as how it's going to go, because the last time our dear governor was here and senator went to go take a walk to see what the damage we had, I have videos of them not listening. Yeah. I said, don't stand next to the wall. Don't go next to Kresge's Beach like that. And they're talking like this. And sure enough, Mother Nature says, don't listen to the mayor. Go ahead. Whew! They got pulled over, soaked. Now he knows about resilience. Thank you so much for all your help.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Governor. Actually, I'm gonna pick up where you just left off, Mayor, and ask a couple of prepared questions, and one of them is on jobs. And so there's a whole initiative going on internationally, nationally, and here in the Commonwealth on the blue economy. And we have some recent incredible investments. You mentioned one of them, Gloucester Marine Genomics Institute. We also have UMass Amherst is investing significantly in the Marine Station. And so the whole notion of the blue economy here on the North Shore is something that we're very interested in, and in what's happening in the Commonwealth. And we're just curious if you can comment on, from your perspective, what is Massachusetts doing to try to grow jobs in the maritime industries?
Well, the first thing I would say is obviously working with our colleagues along the coast to ensure that we're doing the things we need to do to solve some of the infrastructure problems. If you look at the resources that have been invested by the Seaport Council over the course of the past 5 years, it's almost $30 million in waterfront infrastructure. And the single biggest thing you hear over and over again from private operators, whatever their particular interest is in the blue economy, is the infrastructure needs to be there. You know, we have ideas about things we can do to grow our footprint in those spaces, but if the infrastructure is not there to support us, there's really nothing, it's just not going to happen. And so from our point of view, point number one is invest in the infrastructure, which we've been doing. Point number two is to deal with some of the issues around resiliency, and that's why we filed that legislation and why we're going to push so hard for it. I'm telling you, if we don't deal with the resiliency issues, it's going to be really hard on a go-forward basis for people to be able to have the kind of certainty and sense of protection that they're going to need to be successful there. I think the third thing I would say is we don't really know all of the answers to how the blue economy will develop over the course of time, and that's a big part of the reason why we made the investment through the Life Science Center in the Genomics Institute up here, because our view was there may be a lot of really important lessons that can be learned in the life science space by being smarter about how to learn from all of the biology that exists in the ocean. And the final thing I'd say is that if you really believe that we have a sort of existential threat associated with weather and climate and storms, we have to face up to it and make the decisions on a sustained basis to protect the waterfront assets that we have and those that people might be willing to invest in going forward. I don't know why anybody, frankly, unless we figure out some way to create a process and a program that's got a sustained funding stream and a model in place that's demonstrating effectiveness, I don't know why anybody would really invest big time along a waterfront, because they would be taking a big chance with respect to what the future might hold for them. So we're not just interested in getting that legislation passed to do the work, we're also interested in getting it done because it sends a big signal to everybody who might be willing to put private money to work that we're serious about protecting and preserving assets and property along those waterfronts.
Ask Lenny, the boat was almost here, inside the lounge, wasn't it?
Thank you, Governor.
That's how high it was.
I have a question. It's completely off the top of my head, but I'm going to read it off of this printed piece of paper. And welcome back, Governor. It's so great to have you back in the city of Gloucester again. This is to follow up a little bit about what you were talking about with housing. I think you touched on your proposed act to promote housing choices. We'd like to know how you rate its chances for passing this year and what Cape Ann and the Chamber and local businesses can do to help you produce more affordable housing, including workforce housing.
So frankly, the biggest thing you can do is help make the case to the folks on Beacon Hill that you have a sense of urgency about this. I remember going to an event up in this area for Mitt Romney when he ran for governor. Okay, so this would have been 2002, 17 years ago. And he was talking about the crisis we had in housing production. And that was because we'd gone 15 years without really building a heck of a lot of new housing of one kind or another. And he said, this is really going to be an existential threat to communities. It's going to be an existential threat to businesses. It's going to be hard for people to live here. Young people are going to go live somewhere else because they're going to find that they can live for half as much in some other places like, Charlotte, North Carolina, or Austin, Texas, or places like that. And I think about that a lot as I sit here in 2019, 17 years later, and literally we've done zip to deal with our housing production problem over the course of the 17 years in between. And I can't emphasize enough, 30 years of underproducing on housing during a period of time when we've added 500,000 people to our state's population. And when a whole generation of parents, like me, all these baby boomers, right? Our kids, for the most part now, are up and out of the house, and we have these houses that we would love to sell to somebody who can raise a family of their own in our house, while we go live in some place where we don't have to shovel the driveway or cut the grass or do any of that stuff, but there's no place to do it. And I think, and what we've seen recently is because of the arcane nature of the way our housing processes work, where do people build? They build to the upper end of the market. And the reason they build to the upper end of the market is it's going to take 3 or 4 years, and there's no certainty you'll get through the process in the end. The risk-reward ratio, it's going to take me 3 years and I have to spend $500,000, and maybe I will or may not be able to actually get through the process. I'm going to build to the upper end because that's where my biggest opportunity to get my money back is going to come from. And all the way through this spring season, because of that 2/3 rule we have on housing production generally, in Salem, their city council passed 3 housing initiatives, 7-4, 7-4, 6-5. Well, guess what? That's not 2/3. 2/3 is 8-3. Several other communities have 5-member boards of select boards. They got a ton of 3-2 votes, but that's not enough. You got to get to 4-1. Over and over again, Karen Polito and I got more votes than any governor or lieutenant governor running statewide in Massachusetts history in this last election when we ran for governor. We didn't get 2/3. We got 65.8% of the vote. And it makes it really hard for communities to do the reimagining of their downtowns, especially. That whole notion of work, live, and play. If you really want to build downtowns that are made up of housing, office space, entertainment, hospitality, sort of reinvigorate what you may have lost with the decline in retail, you got to figure out a way to get an overlay district done and to create a master plan. Well, if you have to get 2/3 on every single one of those votes, it might happen, but it's not going to happen until after I'm dead. So I just think this thing feels to me like there's a sense of urgency, and I would argue almost desperation amongst a lot of people about what we're not getting done in this space. And the more you can communicate that, guys like Bruce, he's going to be there. I'm not worried about him. because he gets it. But I think the more you do to communicate to people that this really is something that this year, this time, needs to get done. Because, man, we've been circling this one around forever. And we just really need to put it to bed and get it done. Yeah.
Excuse me, everyone, but I have to leave because in 2 hours I will have 100 people in my house. And five minutes later, my husband is going to serve me with divorce papers because I left him with a bunch of people cooking. Today is a very special day for our faith. It's St. Anthony Day. And in Gloucester, there's a couple altars. One in my house. I'm going to have a priest at 12 say Mass with about 100 people and anybody that shows up. So, Governor, I'm glad I was able to make it to one of your events. I'm always somewhere when you come to Gloucester. I have these little two, one for you and one for Karen. These, when we went to Minneapolis, they did something to remember by. It's a little salt bowl and a mug. So there's one for each of you. Thank you very much for the wonderful video you sent. It's really moving and it's so great, but we have a lot of work to do.
We agree.
And I'll get in touch with you through your staff, and I'm glad I was able to see you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. The door is open, 3 Beauport Avenue. Nice to see you. Bye.
Thank you, Angela, sincerely. And thank you, Governor, for all that you do for the fishing community, for Cape Ann and the entire Commonwealth. We're really honored and so pleased that you came here this morning. Thanks again. I've been informed that I missed a couple of our past presidents. We also have Don Sudbay here, Sudbay Motors, and Scott Memhard of Cape Pond Ice. Thank you so much for coming, gentlemen. So, that's a wrap. Thanks so much for coming this morning. I will leave you with this. Our big fundraiser, we are a nonprofit, is coming up in July 18th. It's on the back of your program incorrectly. And we'll be at the Beauport Hotel again. It's our big annual auction with incredible trips, sporting events, and wonderful, wonderful donations from around the region. Please join us. Check us out at capeannchamber.com. Have a great day. Thanks very much for coming.